I was sitting up the other night around 2 a.m.
Never the time for good decisions.
Rarely when good decisions are made, yeah. But it is often when the big questions hit. And I was doom scrolling.
Oh, no.
Not the news, though. I was scrolling through this feed of, I guess you'd call it spiritual wisdom. You know the exact type of feed I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. Sunset backgrounds, the bold serif fonts, maybe some mountains in the mist.
Exactly. Just endless misty mountains. And I'm reading these things, and I started feeling this very specific, very gnawing kind of frustration.
Because of the quotes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm stressed about work. I'm worried about the future, just normal stuff. And I see a quote from the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao.
Ah, yes.
And my immediate reaction was, okay, thanks. That's deeply unhelpful. If we're literally talking about it right now, I'm already wrong. Great.
It really is the classic shut up clause of spirituality.
Right. Or I hit another one from the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. And I'm sitting there looking at my bank account thinking, well, I assure you, this form is definitely empty, but that doesn't make me feel any better.
Yeah, it's that collision between a really desperate need for a practical answer and an answer that seems completely designed to dodge the question.
That is exactly it. And for the longest time, I just assumed one or three things about all this stuff.
Which were?
Well, one, I figured this is just poetry. It's prayer words meant to make me feel a vague vibe, but it doesn't actually mean anything concrete.
Right, just aesthetics.
Yeah. Or two, it's totally irrational.
Yeah.
Like, it's just proof that spirituality is logic taking a vacation. Or three, and this is the one that really gets you, I'm just too stupid or, unenlightened to get it.
The whole don't worry your pretty little finite head about it approach.
Precisely.
Fair.
But today is different.
It is very different today.
Because you brought a document to the table for this deep dive that completely nuked those three assumptions for me. I've been reading through this source material, and I have to say, it is heavy. But it feels like the lights just got turned on in a very dark room.
It really does. I think the text we're diving into today is going to define the philosophical conversation for the next decade. We are looking at The Architecture of Coherence and the Resolution of Paradox by Philip Lillian, published just this year, 2026.
Now, just to be clear for everyone listening, this is not a collection of poems.
Far from it. It's essentially structural physics applied to metaphysics. Lillian is proposing what he calls the Unified Coherence Theory, or UCTE.
UCTE, right.
And he is arguing that those paradoxes you hate, those emptinesses, form riddles. They aren't mysteries. They aren't mistakes in translation. They're actually physics.
That's the hook that got me immediately. The idea that there is an architecture to this. Lillian claims that a paradox is just and this is a quote, a dimensional shadow cast by an infinite reality onto a finite mind.
That is the core sentence of the entire paper right there. A dimensional shadow. If we can unpack that today, if you, the listener, can walk away understanding exactly what that phrase means, it changes everything.
It really does.
It changes how you see your own anxiety, your identity, even the concept of the divine.
It is a massive promise.
Yeah.
But having read the source material, I really think he backs it up.
Yeah.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to decode this architecture.
Let's do it.
We're going to look at the physics of spirituality. We're going to strip away the incense and the meditation bells and just look at the raw geometry of it.
I love that, the raw geometry. So if we're building an architecture, we need a foundation. Lillian starts at the very beginning, the origin of reality itself, but he uses a very specific term for it that I had not heard before.
Right, the omnilectic origin.
Omnilectic. It is a mouthful, I know, but it's a really necessary word. It comes from omni, meaning all, and lectic, which relates to gathering or reading, like in the word dialect.
Okay.
Lillian defines the omnilectic origin as a non-dual field of maximal coherence.
Okay, maximal coherence. I'm trying to visualize that. Is it like a massive library where all the books are perfectly alphabetized?
It's close, but you have to think bigger. Because in a library, the books are highly ordered, yes,
Yeah.
but they are still separate books. A is not Z.
Right, they're distinct objects.
Exactly. But in Lillian's state of maximal coherence, A and Z are completely unified. It's a state where all truths, all possibilities, all opposites exist simultaneously. And this is the key part. They exist without contradiction.
So it's a state where hot and cold aren't actually enemies.
Right. They are just perfectly valid points on a completely unified spectrum of thermal energy. In that omnilectic state, there is no this versus that. There is no me versus you.
No subject versus object.
None. It is total integration. Imagine pure white light. It literally contains red, blue, green, purple, all of them. But in that highly unified state, you don't see the separation, you just see light.
Okay, so structurally, that sounds lovely. Very peaceful. But looking around at my actual life, that is definitely not where we live.
No, it is not.
I live in a world where if I touch a hot stove, it burns my hand. I live in a world where I am very clearly me, and you are very clearly you. So how do we get from that white light to here?
That is the million-dollar question in philosophy. Right. And this is where Lillian's theory of coherence reduction comes in. He argues this is the actual mechanism of creation.
Coherence reduction, which honestly sounds like a file compression format on a computer.
Which is actually the perfect analogy. Think about it that way. If you have a raw, completely uncompressed video file of the entire universe, infinite resolution, infinite angles, infinite data, and you try to play that file on a biological human brain, what happens?
The system crashes immediately. Or I just get a huge file, too large error. I definitely do not have the RAM for that kind of file.
Exactly. We are finite observers. Our hardware, our neurology, our consciousness as it exists in this biological form is strictly limited. We physically cannot process the infinite.
Right.
So for us to experience reality at all, that massive, perfectly coherent signal has to be filtered down. It has to be compressed.
And Lillian uses this visual of a funnel that I found really, really helpful when I was reading the source.
Yes, the funnel is the diagram you absolutely want to keep in your head. Imagine a massive, endlessly wide opening at the top. That's the homilectic origin, the everything.
Flooring into the top.
Exactly, it throws into the funnel. But the funnel rapidly narrows. That narrowing represents the processing or the filtering that's done by you, the finite observer.
And by the time all that data comes out, the little tiny spout at the bottom.
It has been squeezed. It has been violently split. This is what Lillian calls dimensional compression. To fit the infinite into the finite, you literally have to break it into manageable pieces.
You have to split unity into subject and object.
Yes. You have to split eternity into time, past, present, future. You have to split that pure white light into red and blue so you can actually see it.
So the entire world of separate things, the chairs, the tables, you, me, this is how reality is at the top level. This is just how it looks after it's been squeezed through the observer funnel.
Precisely. And this right here is the aha moment for the paradox. A paradox is not a contradiction in reality itself. A paradox happens when a massive truth from the top of the funnel gets squeezed into the tiny language of the bottom of the funnel.
Okay, can you give me a really concrete example of that? Let's ground it.
Sure. Take light. We mentioned light. At the top of the funnel, in purely quantum physics terms, light is both a particle and a wave.
Right.
It is both localized in one spot and spread out everywhere. That is its high coherence, omnilectic state. But if you try to describe that down at the bottom of the funnel in our normal, dualistic, everyday language, you have to choose.
Right. I have to say, is it right here? Or is it over there? Is it a solid dot or is it a ripple in a pond?
Exactly. And because our language and our brains can't easily hold the concept of both simultaneously, we get incredibly confused. We say, well, it can't be both. That's logically impossible.
And so we call it a paradox.
Right. The paradox, that statement that says it is both A and not A, is just the shadow of a higher unity falling onto a lower dimension. Lillian's takeaway here is so vital. The paradox is not an error in the software of the universe. It's just an artifact of the compression process.
That is such a relief, honestly. It means I'm not crazy for seeing contradictions everywhere. The contradictions are just built into the viewing mechanism itself.
Exactly. You are trying to look at a 3D object while wearing 2D glasses. Of course it looks weird and contradictory.
Now, you just mentioned wave and particle, which actually segues us perfectly into segment 2 of the deep dive. Because Lillian does not just leave this as an armchair philosophy. He goes incredibly hard into the science.
He really does.
And I think for a lot of listeners, and definitely for me, this is where it crosses over from being a neat idea to, oh, wow, this is actually real.
It totally grounds it. Because normally when people start talking about non-dual fields and unity, hard scientists roll their eyes and leave the room.
Yeah, sounds like new age fluff to them.
Right. But Lillian argues that what mystics have been describing purely experientially for 3,000 years is actually structurally identical to what quantum physicists have been banging their heads against for the last 100 years.
Right, so he talks extensively about wave function collapse. Now, I am not a physicist, but I have watched enough sci-fi movies to know this is a big deal. Break that down for us purely in the context of this UCTE coherence theory.
Okay, so in quantum mechanics, before you measure a subatomic particle, it exists in what's called a superposition.
Right.
That is a pure state of probability. The particle isn't at point A, and it isn't at point B. It is technically, mathematically represented as a wave that covers all possible positions simultaneously.
Which sounds exactly like the analytic origin. Maximal possibilities all happening at once.
It is the exact same underlying structure, high coherence. But the moment you observe it, the moment a finite interaction actually happens, what happens to the wave?
It snaps.
It collapses. The probability wave function collapses into a single localized particle at a single specific location. It goes entirely from everything everywhere all at once to something somewhere right now.
Wow.
And Lillian argues this isn't just some bizarre quirk of subatomic particles that only happens in a lab. This is the fundamental movement of consciousness itself. We, as observers, are constantly collapsing the infinite potential of reality into the finite specific experience of right now.
So the act of observation itself is the funnel.
Observation is the act of reduction. You cannot see the infinite wave and the finite particle at the same time. You literally have to reduce the coherence to have an experience. You have to limit the data stream to make it readable.
He also mentions another scientific concept here, gauge symmetry reduction.
Yes.
Which, to be honest, sounded way more intimidating to me than wave functions.
Yes.
What is the simple layman's version of gauge symmetry reduction?
I know it sounds insanely complex, but the concept is actually beautiful. Think of a perfect smooth sphere. A billiard ball, but perfect.
Okay, got it.
It is perfectly symmetrical. No matter how you turn it in your hand, it looks exactly the same. That represents high symmetry. Now, it's perfect, sure, but it's also entirely featureless. It's essentially boring.
Right, there's no geography on it.
Exactly. To create something interesting, to create a world or a human face or a mountain range, you have to break that perfect symmetry.
You have to dent the sphere.
You have to dent it. You have to introduce distinctions. Up has to become different from down. Left has to become different from right. Lillian points out that in cosmology, in the actual physics of the Big Bang, the fundamental forces of the universe, like gravity and electromagnetism, they only emerged because the early, perfectly unified universe cooled down and broke its symmetry.
So perfection, that total high-low symmetry, is actually just a blank slate. In order to have a life, or to have a universe at all, you physically need the reduction. You need the breakage.
Yes, you need the asymmetry. And think about how this entirely reframes the theological idea of the fall from grace, or the Buddhist idea that the physical world is suffering or fallen.
Yeah.
It's not a cosmic mistake. It's a structural necessity for differentiation. You simply cannot have a story in a world where absolutely everything is exactly the same.
That is so powerful, because it moves us completely away from mystical confusion, where we just throw our hands up and say, well, it's a divine mystery. It moves us to seeing these paradoxes as predictable artifacts.
Predictable artifacts, exactly.
Like if I know the exact geometry of the room I'm standing in, I can perfectly predict where the shadows are going to fall.
Because it's not magic, it's geometry. It is the literal geometry of consciousness. And once you begin to understand the geometry, you can actually stop fighting the shape of reality.
Okay, so we have the architecture down, we've got the funnel, the compression, the quantum physics, but I want to get deeply personal with this now.
Let's do it.
Because this unified theory is great on paper, but I still have to wake up tomorrow morning and deal with being me. And segment 3 of the source material gets right into the weeds on identity paradoxes.
This is absolutely where the rubber meets the road for most people.
So let's tackle the big one. To empty oneself is to fill oneself. I've heard this a million times in yoga classes. I've read it in scriptures, self-help books.
It's everywhere.
And logically, on its face, it is pure nonsense. If I empty my coffee cup, it is empty. It is not full. If I empty my bank account, I am definitely not rich.
Right. In basic physical space, emptiness is just a void. It's a lack of something.
So how does Lillian make sense of this?
He applies the coherence explanation here. He says, we have to define our terms structurally, not physically. What is emptiness in a system of complex information?
Okay, what is it?
Emptiness is the reduction of noise.
Oh.
Think about your mind right now. Is it empty?
God, no. It is a massive traffic jam. I'm actively thinking about my next question for you. I'm thinking about what I'm having for lunch later. Once if I left the back door unlocked and I'm randomly replaying an argument I had in 2014.
Exactly. That is internal turbulence.
Yeah.
It is a very low coherence state. There is a ton of data, yes, but it is highly disorganized. It's just static. Lillian defines emptiness not as a void, but as the dissolution of that constructed noise. It is the active quieting of the egoic narrative.
Okay, so if that's emptying, what is the fulfillment part?
Fulfillment isn't getting more new stuff. Fulfillment is the return of the high coherence signal from the origin. Once the obstruction, meaning the noise in your head, is removed, the actual clear signal from the omnilectic origin can finally get through.
The source uses a really great visual here. The cup versus the trophy.
It's a simple analogy, but it really sticks in the brain. Imagine a cup that is filled all the way to the brim with old, stagnant, muddy water.
Okay.
That muddy water is your current mental state. Your worries, your rigid defenses, your endless definitions of who you think you are. You physically cannot pour fresh, crystal clear spring water into that cup. It will just spill over the sides.
Because there's no room. You literally have to pour out the old muddy water first. That is the emptying.
And the exact fraction of a second you do that, the fresh water, the fulfillment can enter the vessel. So the paradox completely resolves because they aren't opposites. They are just sequential stages of a hydraulic process. You empty the noise to fill with coherence.
So it's not saying empty equals full. It's saying the act of emptying is the prerequisite allowance for filling.
Correct. You aren't filling yourself with new, better thoughts. You are filling yourself with the original coherence that was being completely blocked by your constant thoughts.
Wow. Okay, then there's the other massive identity paradox, which I find even trickier to wrap my head around. Becoming yourself by letting go of yourself.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
This one always trips me up, because if I let go of myself, who is left to actually be me? Am I just walking around like a hollow ghost?
This is where I think Lillian is absolutely brilliant. He points out that the confusion only exists because we are using the exact same word yourself to describe two completely different structural things.
Okay.
He calls them distinct regimes.
Lay out these regimes for me.
First, you have what he calls the small self. The technical term he uses is the observer bundle.
Observer bundle. It sounds like a software package you buy online for a webcam or something.
It kind of is. Structurally, it's a bundle of low-level coherence reductions. It is your habits, your specific memories, your psychological defense mechanisms, your preferences for coffee over tea. It is the mask you wear to navigate the physical world.
So it's the me that gets highly offended when someone cuts me off in traffic.
Yes. It's the you that is entirely defined by its borders and limitations.
That is the me I spend 99% of my day interacting with, the one constantly protecting my fragile ego.
Right. We all do. But then beneath that, there is the true self. Lillian defines this structurally as the symmetry coherence operator.
Okay, symmetry coherence operator. That sounds very technical, almost cold. Is it a robot?
It sounds cold on paper, but experientially, it is actually the most intimate, warm part of who you are. It is the intrinsic identity that exists prior to the reduction process.
The part before the funnel.
Exactly. It is the pure consciousness that is currently looking out through the bundle of your habits. It's the part of you that remains directly connected to the omnilectic origin. It is the silent observer behind the noisy mask.
So the bundle is the filter, and the operator is the light shining through it.
Exactly. So when the ancient advice says, let go of yourself to find yourself, it literally translates in UCTE to let go of the observer bundle, the small self, so that the symmetry coherence operator, the true self, can actually come online and steer.
You aren't disappearing at all. You are just upgrading the operating system.
You are shifting from a glitchy, low-coherence, noisy version of yourself to the original high-coherence, silent version. You don't lose your identity. You gain massive resolution.
Gaining resolution. I really like that. It's like going from a blurry 480p video to crystal clear 4K. The picture is still showing the same scene. It's just true.
Perfect analogy. And when you actually operate from that 4K high-resolution state, the feeling of paradox just disappears.
Okay, so that perfectly covers who we are. But we still have to, do things in the world.
Unfortunately, yes.
We have jobs, we have hobbies, we have goals to achieve. Segment 4 of the paper covers action paradoxes. And I have to say, this contained what was honestly the most immediately practical piece of advice I found in the entire document. We are talking about doing versus being.
Ah, yes. The famous Taoist concept of wu-wei, or non-action.
Right. The paradox is usually stated as something like, you need to try incredibly hard to reach a state where you don't try at all. Or you perform at your absolute best when you care the least about the outcome.
We see this everywhere in high performance. Sports, music, public speaking. If you are a golfer and you overthink the mechanics of your swing, you're going to slice it straight into the woods.
Right. Or if you try to consciously remember every single word of a speech while you're standing on stage giving it, you're going to stutter and freeze.
Exactly.
But, and here's the massive rub for me, you can't just not prepare. If I walk onto a tennis court having never held a racket in my life and I just don't try,
No.
I'm not going to magically channel Roger Federer.
No, you're not.
I'm just going to be a guy looking totally confused and probably getting hit in the face by a tennis ball.
Exactly right. Don't try is terrible, destructive advice for a beginner. And this is where Lillian introduces the concept of threshold dynamics. This is so crucial for understanding human performance. He says effort and surrender aren't actually enemies. They just operate on completely different sides of a specific threshold.
Break that threshold down for me. What exactly is happening below the threshold?
Below the threshold is the training phase, the skill acquisition phase. Here, intense effort is absolutely required. Why? Because you need effort to aggressively reduce noise. You practice your scales on the piano over and over to force your fingers to know where the keys are.
You study the raw material.
Right. You are manually building the neurological structure. You are reducing the chaos of your own incompetence.
So effort builds the container. Effort tunes the physical instrument. You essentially have to grind really hard to force the small self out of the way.
Yes, you are literally training the observer bundle to be physically efficient. But, and this is the huge pivot in his theory, once you cross that threshold of competence, once you actually know the song, the dynamic completely flips. Continued effort suddenly introduces noise.
That is the classic choking phenomenon in sports.
Exactly. If you are on stage playing a complex piano concerto and you suddenly start consciously thinking, okay, move my ring finger to C sharp right now, you instantly disrupt the flow state.
So you're using the wrong tool for the job.
Yes, you are trying to use the small self, the clunky bundle, to do the high-speed job of the true self, the operator. The bundle is just too slow to play the music.
The analogy they used in the source was tuning a radio. I absolutely love this. It instantly clicked for me.
It's the best way to visualize it. Imagine a really old analog radio dial. When you are looking for a specific station, you have to actively grab the knob and turn it. You are scanning, you're listening to horrible static, you're micro-adjusting back and forth.
That is effort. That is below the threshold. You are actively searching.
You are actively hunting for the signal, but once you finally hit that clear signal,
Just take your hand off the dial.
you must take your hand off the knob. If you keep turning the dial after you've already found the perfect station, just because you think trying harder is always better, what happens?
You lose the station completely. You're just listening to static again.
Precisely. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is the logical, structural requirement for reception. You have to stop tuning so you can actually hear the broadcast.
That is such a huge relief to hear.
Yeah.
Because I think in our culture, we feel incredibly guilty whenever we stop grinding.
Oh, constant guilt. Hustle culture demands it.
We feel like if we aren't suffering, if we aren't sweating, we aren't actually working. But Lillian is saying, no, structurally, at a certain point, the grinding is actually what is jamming the signal.
It disrupts the high coherence. The high performance state, what athletes call flow, operates on a very high coherence frequency. Pure effort is a low coherence tool. It is clunky and slow. It's great for building the radio, but it is terrible for broadcasting the actual music.
So the practical takeaway is just to recognize where you currently are. Ask yourself, am I tuning the radio right now, or am I listening to the music?
That is exactly the question to ask. If you're still learning the skill, grab the knob and tune away. But if you're stepping on stage to perform, take your hands off.
All right, so we've done the deep physics, we've done identity, we've done action. Now let's go really, really big. Let's move to segment 5, the divine and the human. This touches on heavy theology, on God, on the ultimate source.
This is the ultimate paradox, the one that causes the most friction.
The kingdom of God is within you. Or in Hinduism, Atman is Brahman. How can the literal infinite be inside the finite? It sounds like trying to physically pour the entire Pacific Ocean inside a standard coffee mug.
Which mathematically and structurally should just result in a shattered coffee mug and a very wet floor.
Right. It seems physically impossible. So how does Lillian resolve this one without just throwing his hands up and saying, well, it's divine magic?
He uses a framework he calls nested coherence. He says we get completely confused because we constantly treat the human and the divine as two separate objects sitting next to each other on a table, like an apple sitting next to an orange.
Right.
But they aren't side-by-side objects in the same space. They are dimensionally layered.
Layered. Okay, like Russian nesting dolls.
It's similar, but let's go back to the shadow analogy from earlier. It is much more precise. Think about a highly complex 3D object. Let's say a beautiful, intricate bronze statue.
Okay, I see it.
If you shine a bright light on that statue, it casts a flat 2D shadow onto the wall behind it.
Right, and the shadow is totally flat. It lacks all the detail and depth of the statue. It's just a dark outline.
Exactly. But the shadow is directly caused by the object. The shadow is a lower dimensional projection of the higher dimensional object. Lillian argues that the human, the finite observer, is quite literally the shadow cast by the divine, the infinite down into the lower dimensions of space and time.
So the divine isn't inside me, like a coin sitting in my pocket. The divine is the source of the projection that currently appears as me.
Yes, you are a local, highly specific modulation of that infinite signal. Form is the shadow of emptiness. The shadow simply cannot exist without the object casting it, and you cannot exist without the omlectic origin casting you.
That actually makes the phrase, "the kingdom is within you," finally make logical sense to me. It's not physically inside my biological body. It's inside my structural architecture. It's my source code.
Exactly. You are the flat screen where the movie is currently playing out. The projector up in the booth is the divine. The movie on the screen couldn't happen without the continuous light streaming from the projector.
Which naturally leads us to the stickiest theological debate of all time, the one that people have literally fought wars over for centuries. Free will versus omniscience.
Oh yeah, the ultimate headache generator for philosophers.
Right, because if the source, or God, or the simulation, whatever you want to call it, already knows everything that is ever going to happen, if the whole movie is already sitting on the film reel up in the booth, do I actually have real choice down here? Or am I just an actor reciting pre-written lines?
Lillian solves this elegantly with what he calls multi-tier coherence, and honestly, I think this is the most brilliant structural solution to this I have ever seen. He says omniscience and free will simply exist on different floors of the dimensional building.
Okay, take us to the different floors. Walk us through it.
So omniscience is the view from the absolute top floor, the penthouse, the omnilectic level. Up there, all possible timelines, all choices, all outcomes are perfectly unified. It is all known because past, present, and future are viewed as one single static geometric object.
The entire map is fully visible at once.
Yes. From the penthouse, the journey is already totally complete. But free will is the view down on the ground floor. Lillian's technical term for this is local coherence modulation capacity.
Which is just a really fancy academic way of saying the driver of the car.
Correct. Down here, deep inside the heavily reduced state, inside time, you are actively navigating the collapse of the quantum wave function moment by moment. You are making real-time choices. You are steering the car left or right at the intersection, and those choices are entirely mathematically real. You are the one collapsing the probability wave.
So from the top floor, the entire map of the city is perfectly visible. But down on the ground floor, I am actually the one physically turning the steering wheel.
Yes. And here is the absolute kicker of the whole theory. The paradox only exists if you foolishly try to squash the penthouse and the ground floor into the exact same room.
Right.
If you try to make the small self down on the street omniscient, or if you try to make the true self up in the penthouse limited by time, but if you just accept that reality is fundamentally layered, you can easily have a total map omniscience and a local driver free will happening simultaneously without any contradiction.
It's all about relativity. It completely depends on where the observer is currently standing.
Exactly. It is not A or B. It is A structurally above B. They are totally compatible because they never actually touch on the same dimensional plane.
That is so satisfying. It really is. It allows for both cosmic destiny and personal agency. I don't feel like a helpless puppet on a string, but I also don't feel like I'm just randomly careening through a chaotic, meaningless universe.
Because it respects the architecture of both layers.
Man. All right, let's move to segment 6. Because even if we completely understand the physics and the geometry and the theology, we still have to deal with our heavy human emotions, existential paradoxes, fear, freedom, and separation.
This is where the dry theory finally becomes deep psychological healing. Let's look at wholeness versus separation.
Right, the crushing feeling of I am completely alone in this cold universe versus the lofty spiritual claim that all is one.
Lillian uses a concept called ontological layering to resolve this. Wholeness exists permanently at the origin layer. That is an unbreakable structural fact. You are connected to absolutely everything because you all pour out of the exact same funnel source.
Right.
But separation exists purely at the relational layer.
The reality down at the bottom of the funnel.
Yes, down here on the ground floor. You are physically separate from me. I literally cannot read your mind. You cannot physically feel my back pain. I cannot eat your lunch for you and make you full. That separation is a hard, factual reality on this specific layer.
So my deep feeling of loneliness isn't actually a lie or a failure. I shouldn't just gaslight myself into saying, oh, I'm not lonely, I'm magically one with the universe.
No, absolutely not. That is what psychologists call spiritual bypassing. It's toxic. Lillian's framework says, validate the real separation you feel on the horizontal layer, but firmly anchor yourself in the structural unity on the vertical layer.
Oh, that.
You do not have to deny your very real human loneliness to believe in cosmic oneness. You just have to correctly recognize they're happening at two different altitudes of reality.
That is deeply validating. It means I have permission to feel isolated and perfectly connected at the exact same moment.
Exactly. The geometry of the paradox allows for both to be true.
Okay, what about fear versus freedom? Because that's a huge one.
This one hit me the hardest when I first read the paper. Lillian makes a really sharp clinical distinction here. He argues that fear is nothing more than a local coherence distortion.
A distortion, like a glitch in a video game.
Yes, a temporary glitch in the signal. Fear strictly arises when the observer feels physically or psychologically threatened. But ask yourself, who exactly feels threatened?
The small self.
Yeah.
The observer bundle.
Precisely. The bundle knows it is fragile. It knows it is biologically temporary. So whenever it encounters friction, it immediately generates loud, low-level noise. Danger. Protect me. Hoard resources. Run away. That static noise is what we experience as fear.
But freedom, where does that sit?
Freedom is an intrinsic property of the origin itself. The unalectic origin literally cannot be threatened. It cannot be reduced. It cannot be destroyed. It is infinite. Therefore, by definition, it is perfectly free.
So freedom is permanently built into the concrete foundation of the architecture, but fear is just a temporary, noisy byproduct of the filtering process.
Exactly. The source is totally free. The filter just gets scared sometimes. The conclusion Lillian draws from this is incredibly profound. He writes, we are fundamentally free. We are only accidentally afraid.
We are fundamentally free. We are really accidentally afraid. Man, that is one to write on the bathroom mirror.
It completely changes how you treat your own fear. You don't treat it as some deep, dark, fundamental truth about a hostile universe. You just treat it like annoying static on the radio dial.
Right, it's there. It's annoying, but it's not the actual music. And more importantly, it's not me.
Exactly. It's just the small self bundle acting up. It's just the car alarm going off because a loud truck drove by. It's not the driver.
Okay, so we have extensively covered the architecture, the quantum identity, the action thresholds, the divine shadow, and the existential layers.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But I still have one massive lingering question. The ultimate why. Why does it have to be this incredibly complicated? Segment 7 covers the purpose of paradox.
Why can't reality just be simple, right? Why do we even need the funnel?
Yeah. Why do we have to go through all this painful reduction and shadow business? Why not just let us stay floating in the warm, perfectly peaceful bath of the unalectic origin?
Lillian actually gives a few concrete reasons for this. First is simply finite representation. It is structurally inevitable. If you want to have a narrative story, if you want to have an experience of some specific thing rather than experiencing absolutely everything constantly as white noise, you have to reduce the data.
Right, the RAM limitation.
You simply cannot fit the vast ocean into a tiny cup without spilling most of it. The distortion, the paradox we feel, is just the spill.
Okay, so it's literally just the required cost of admission for being a conscious human.
Right. If you want to exist as a distinct individual, you have to accept the structural limitations of distinct existence. The second reason is just layer conflation. A lot of the time, we are confused simply because we mix up the layers ourselves. That's just user error on our part.
But then he mentioned this concept of a transformative catalyst, and this to me was deeply fascinating. He says paradoxes are mind breakers.
This is the actual pedagogical tool of the universe. Think about ancient Zen koans. What is the sound of one hand clapping?
It makes absolutely no sense.
It makes zero logical sense, and that is exactly the point. Because if spiritual truth was purely, cleanly logical, your ego would just instantly eat it and assimilate it. Your ego loves logic. It loves to neatly categorize and file things away. Oh, I totally understand God now. God fits perfectly in box A check.
The ego loves to be right. It loves to successfully capture the truth and put it on a shelf.
Exactly. But a paradox severely jams the gears of the ego. Empty to fill, die to live. The ego cannot physically process that math. So it stalls out the conceptual mind. It causes a forced system crash.
Wow.
And in that exact microsecond of stalling, when your busy mind finally stops chatting because it is so utterly confused, there is a coherence opening.
It forces you to stop frantically thinking and forces you to just start being.
It manually creates a gap in the armor where the higher coherence signal can finally sneak in. The paradox is mathematically designed to trip you up so you fall face first into the truth. It is a literal trapdoor for the human ego.
I absolutely love that image. Tripping into the truth.
It's beautiful.
And finally, rounding out the paper, he talks about healing as restoration.
Yes. Because in this structural model, healing isn't about fixing a broken machine. You are not fundamentally broken. You are just heavily distorted. Healing is simply coherence restoration. It is just calmly tuning the radio back to the clear signal you already own.
It's consciously resolving the messy distortion right at the intersection where the psychological layer meets the spiritual layer.
When you finally align the vertical layers, when you get the noisy small self to stop fighting and align with the silent true self, the feeling of paradox just naturally dissolves and you return to wholeness.
Okay, so what does this all practically mean for us, the listener? We've looked at this massive, dense document. We've mapped out the funnel, the quantum shadows, the dimensional layers. What is the grand final takeaway?
I think the real grand unification here is what he calls the unified resolution principle. Restoring your internal coherence automatically dissolves the paradox. We have to stop violently fighting the contradictions we see. We have to stop trying to solve the puzzle of our lives purely with our conceptual minds.
We stop demanding it has to be neatly A versus B.
Right. And we start structurally reframing how we view the world. We need to remind everyone listening today, a paradox in your life serves as a bridge. It is not a brick wall. When you hit a massive contradiction in your daily life, you haven't hit a dead end. You've just hit a transition point between two-dimensional layers. It is an invitation.
An invitation to stop looking horizontally and start looking up the funnel.
Yes. Look up the funnel.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought today, something really provocative to chew on as you go about your week. We talked deeply about how a paradox is just a shadow cast by a higher unity. So I want you to think about the primary struggle you are feeling right now in your own life. Maybe it's a huge career decision you can't make. Maybe it's a heavy feeling you can't shake, or a painful tension between two total opposites in your life, like the demand of your work versus the needs of your personal life. Or your desire for total freedom versus your deep need for stable commitment.
We all have those.
What if that specific struggle is not actually a problem that needs to be solved? What if that exact tension is actually the shadow of a higher unity desperately trying to fit into your finite life?
That completely flips the script. It means the actual size of the struggle you feel is directly proportional to the size of the truth that is currently trying to emerge through you.
Exactly. So what would actually happen if, instead of exhaustingly trying to solve the paradox, logically trying to violently force A to win over B, you just stopped? What if you looked for the silent coherence underneath it all and just bravely allowed the shadow to be there?
That is exactly where the absolute freedom is. That is where the clear signal finally comes through.
That's it for this deep dive. Thank you so much for exploring the intricate architecture of reality with us today.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
See you next time.